All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Colin Conner. I'm the Executive Director for the Greater Lynn Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to our breakfast, our government affairs meeting today. It's kind of a breakfast conversation with two of our candidates for congressional rep for District 6. We're going to introduce them shortly. Candidate Bob May and candidate Mark Tashjian. Tashjian.
Yep.
I apologize. I will get that right. I apologize. We did invite Congressman Moulton, who was unable to attend. So with that, I'm going to flip over to our candidates, and we will start with the questions. So now that I ruined your name for to start with, I guess we'll start with you. Would you care to introduce yourself to the business community?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mark Tashjian. I actually own a small business in Georgetown, Mass. I'm originally from Worcester, Mass. And I went to University of Connecticut for college. I went to a public high school, and I went to college for economics. And after school, I worked briefly in that industry before working in my business as a polo club. So I worked at a number of polo clubs around the country and around the world. And I came back here and worked at Myopia Polo Club in Hamilton before starting my own business. Polo in general is viewed as something that's elitist, and I wanted to make it more accessible to people to be able to ride horses and things like that. I was given that opportunity in college. I don't come from a wealthy family at all. I learned it in college. And so I wanted to just make the sport more accessible. And after having a successful business for a long time, but also being interested in politics, I worked in a presidential campaign when I was in college, a libertarian presidential campaign. And I thought there was so much division going on in the country with the two main parties. I thought it was important to run as a third party candidate as a libertarian to try to be the arbitrator between those two parties. Whenever you see a lot of division and two people can't come to resolution, you need to find a third person to step in who's not part of either of those to be able to mediate. And so I think that, combined with my real passion for the economy and knowing that things going on in the economy that are hurting it right now, like inflation, are really hurting everybody, the middle class, lower class, everybody, just the same. And we need to have some policies that will actually help those, help inflation, help the economy.
Wonderful, thank you. Bob, would you care to introduce yourself and your campaign?
Thanks, Colin. First, I'd like to thank you, Colin, and everyone in the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event and inviting me to participate this morning. I'm Bob May. I am the Republican candidate for Congress up here in the 6th District, which is the North Shore and Memrac Valley, essentially. I'm from West Peabody, where I've lived with my wife, Trish, for the past 30 years. We have 4 kids. They've all grown, so we're empty nesters at this point. I have an underdegree in mechanical engineering. I went on to get a graduate degree in business with a concentration in finance from Northeastern. After I got my MBA, I worked as a business consultant for a couple of years. Our largest client at that time was the federal government. I went on to start my own small business right now it's up in Newburyport, but it's called TechSource Thermal Solutions, and it's in the electronic components industry, specializing in a little niche market called thermal management. This is actually my second campaign. I ran as a candidate for state representative down in the 13th Essex District, which at that time was Peabody, Middleton, and Danvers. Because of some redistricting, I was made ineligible to run for that seat again. And so after deciding not to sit this one out, I stepped up and took on this campaign for Congress.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, guys. Now for the easy questions. The just for clarification for you guys and for people living it or watching later, the SBA, Small Business Association, federal government, defines a small business as one with less than 1,500 employees and $41 million in gross receipts. So less than those two thresholds. Many of the questions today are going to kind of reference this business segment. That's a lot of what our chamber represents, is that small business community. So I just wanted to add that. Starting off, I'd like you to kind of start by identifying one or two policies which you support, which are directly advantageous to the business startup or the entrepreneurial community. Bob, would you like to kick this one off?
So while I understand your definition that the small business defines a small business, I mean, I'm a member of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which is a advocate for small businesses across the country. They did a survey, and their membership actually consists 75% of businesses that employ less than 10 people. So that, to me, that's a huge number. And I'm thinking it's going to be really important to focus on those small businesses, because those are the ones that are going to grow into medium and larger size businesses and really drive our economy. So that being said, I think a couple policies that I think are important and really helpful to those independent entrepreneurs and small businesses. One is credit card competition. So I understand that there's a bill going through Congress now that would enhance competition for credit card, small companies that take credit cards. So my company personally doesn't take credit cards, but I know a few who do, and I know that the fees have gotten, my understanding is they've doubled over the past 10 years, and that's essentially due to no competition. This bill would require companies to have at least 2 credit card processing companies to choose from. So I think just introducing competition into that kind of payment receipt would be beneficial and obviously cost savings. The other would be addressing big tech anti-competitiveness. So if you're selling directly to consumers, obviously you have to have some kind of internet presence, right? And what happens now is if you get to a certain size, you become the nail that sticks up out of the board and you get pounded down by Google and Amazon by getting your search results. If someone's looking for your particular widget or service, it gets throttled down once you get to a certain size to benefit either competing products or services on Amazon itself or people that are big advertisers with Google. So I think those are two policies right off the bat that I would absolutely support to help small businesses.
All right, thank you so much. Mark, the same question. Identify one or two policies you support which directly advantage the business startup and the entrepreneurial community.
So I'd like to thank Bob for bringing up the fact that most small businesses in the important sector of the economy is businesses that are starting up under 10 people, and those are the businesses that are going to grow. I do think that all stages of businesses certainly need help. You know, when I was starting my business, going through the different levels of red tape is a major problem, both at a local level and at a national level as well. Different environmental policies, different regulations, things like that. So I think that we really need to make it a simpler process for businesses to be able to start and operate. You know, free market economics is supposed to be easy entry and exit into an industry. For someone to enter into an industry right now, there's so many hurdles to be able to enter. And the costs to enter right now are very high. Labor costs are very high. Educational costs, if I want to go and get training, are very high. All these sorts of things, these different costs, we need to get under control. And I really think that the government has been having policies, especially the federal government, that have been increasing these costs, inflationary policies, and they're not doing deflationary policies. Even having a deflationary policy like increasing the interest rates is going to beat up small businesses. Anyone who wants to start or expand their business now needs to be dealing with exorbitantly higher interest rates, and we don't need to be raising interest rates to be bringing down inflation. We've seen other countries around the world do it in other ways, and so I think we need to change from these demand destruction policies to take care of interest rates to supply side policies like reducing red tape, reducing taxes, things like that.
No, thank you. It's a great lead-in. It's like you read my notes or something. Right on that point, affordable access to capital is actually a main driver to small business success. Many small businesses that have a failure in their business history, that failure is usually tied back to the cost of capital to their small business. So what steps might you take to ensure that the small business access to capital remains both affordable and liquid? If you'd like to take this.
Yeah, certainly. I think that, like I said before, increasing interest rates is going to be devastating on small businesses and our access to capital. We need to be keeping interest rates in check. I don't think that using interest rates as the Federal Reserve as the means to be controlling inflation is a good thing. We don't know as small business owners what the interest rates are going to be in the future. If we're going to be going out and getting some kind of a loan with a 5-year fixed term, we don't know what the rate's going to be after that. Do I want to be taking a 5-year loan right now with maybe a 6% interest rate if it might be 12% in the future? So that's an important thing for the government not to be messing around with. There's other ways that we can be fighting inflation. Like I said, doing things that can increase the supply. We have a basic supply and demand curve. We can either bring the demand down to bring the price down, or we can increase the supply. And so we could do things like reducing, getting rid of the Jones Act to make it easier for ships to be going to our different islands, like Hawaii. We can be bringing down any kind of regulation that's going to make it easier for a business to operate. We could be opening up our oil and gas wells. America has been the driving force, the #1 country that's brought down its CO2 emissions over the past 10 years. And it's mainly because we started producing more natural gas within our country. And now we see what OPEC is doing. We're beholden to OPEC. They're cutting the amount of oil being produced. We can be producing that oil in our country, and we can be exporting that oil over to Europe, who right now is in a really bad situation. And so it's going to help both us. It's going to help international security as well. Europe's not going to be beholden to these other countries that are not democratic countries. And it's also going to help our small business owners. It's going to bring down the cost of all the goods and services. The cost of transportation right now is exorbitant. And so that's a major driver as well to inflation.
All right, thank you. Bob, same question for you. Affordable access to capital is a main driver to small business success. What steps would you take to ensure small business access to capital remains affordable and liquid?
Mark alluded to inflation. I mean, I think the main driver of inflation today is the federal government printing and pumping literally trillions of dollars into the economy. So yes, it's a supply demand thing, but I think it's more on the monetary policy side. To a lesser extent, obviously, energy prices are causing inflation due to our loss of energy independence on day one. But I think inflation overall is one of these, unintended consequences that affects so many other aspects of our society, including our business practices. Small businesses are really hurt by this because, as Mark alluded to, you can't really start to finance and get capital, which I mean it's the lifeblood of a small business, because you need it for taxes, for economic growth, to fund inventory, a whole host of things. And when interest rates are in a flux, it's very difficult to plan whether it's short term or long term. So that being said, I do think the Small Business Administration does a fair job at being the main go-to for small businesses for their funding needs. I think there is some area for improvement with respect to funding small and micro businesses in the Black and Hispanic community, because there have been studies done that indicate that those communities are underserved. Those Black and Hispanic entrepreneurs are being underserved. I read a study recently that said it was from 2012 to 16, the number of SBA loans increased, I think, by a third, and the amount funded pretty much remained consistent, which is encouraging, because that means there's a lot of small businesses that are being funded and getting up and running. Whereas in the past 4 years, the number of loans that were completed essentially stayed the same, actually dropped a little bit, but the amount of funding went up by like 45%. So by saying that amount of funding is being much higher, that means these aren't really smaller micro businesses that are being funded. They're more to the group outside of the 75% that I mentioned are 10 employees or less. So that's an area that I think I would work on, appointed to the Small Business Committee in the House.
Nice. All right, thank you. So you had actually mentioned earlier talking about business regulations. So traditionally, in the broad economics span, business deregulation traditionally leads to business growth. That's broad brushing, obviously. Where do you stand on business deregulation broadly, and more specifically, how it applies to that direct small business community?
So I'm a small government person in general. I think it's fairly well known that most government regulation results in some kind of cost, right? Whether you need to add or change to your physical facility, increased record keeping, or increased reporting, there's a cost associated with that. And whatever, regardless of what the actual cost is, it's always disproportionately inflicted on smaller businesses. So in that respect, I really believe that there is a need to review any regulation that's deemed appropriate to, and not just small businesses, this applies to all businesses, to make sure that that regulation and the requirements to conform to that regulation results in a measurable need to see if it's meeting the accomplished goal, whether it's a benchmark or a metric, whatever it is. In other words, no busy work. When I was a business consultant, I was a big proponent of a term called value added, right? And that allows you to look at a process or a practice, whatever it is, to make sure that every step in that process adds value to the final outcome. The rest of it is just busy work. So I would absolutely make sure that any regulation that's dictated upon a small business met that requirement.
Thank you. Mark, same question. Business regulation traditionally leads to business growth. Where do you stand on business deregulation broadly, and specifically referring to the small business?
Yeah, I think Bob and I are pretty in tune with that. Both of us being small business owners and going through the process, we both have a pretty solid understanding of the economy and what businesses need. And we both, I think, believe strongly in smaller government, less regulations, things like that. One thing neither of us in the last question touched upon when it talked about capital and increasing our availability to capital is also human capital. That's one of the most important types of capital that we have in our businesses, and our availability to get access to that and maintain that capital. And regulations is something that really stifles our ability to do that, whether it's regulations relating to hiring and firing practices, whether it's regulations relating to immigration policies that makes it harder for us to get the workers into the country that we need. Immigrants are the driver of the economy. Every single person sitting in here at one point, our families were immigrants, I'd be willing to bet. And that has always been one of the driving forces of the economy, bringing ideas, bringing hard work, things like that. Immigrants always have a higher savings rate as well, which again goes right back into our access to capital. So, and right now we see that scenario where both parties are just totally unable to come up with a solution for that. And one of the driving forces to me running again is that I think that we've seen over the last 10 to 20 years that both parties have been involved in one area or another of increasing spending, increasing regulations, things like that. It may be different areas. The Republicans may have their areas where they want to increase spending, and the Democrats their areas to increase spending. But overall, like Bob said, we need to shrink the government. We need to make it easier for businesses to operate.
Awesome. Thank you. You, at one point in time during the last question, and again, you referenced it here as well, you talked kind of about the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So our next question really focuses on that. Job preparedness and employee retention, those two kind of key factors. How ready an employee is to enter into a job and perform the roles, and then the employee retention, how able is the business to actually keep that employee and develop them through time. So those two are two major factors impacting small businesses today. What policies do you support which will impact these areas in both the near term and the long term?
So I think that it's important for kids to work and for kids to have their first job and to learn. I started working, when I was 14, I got, my worker's permit or whatever, and I was probably making $6.70 an hour. I remember getting a 10-cent raise and it being a big deal. And nowadays I have a lot of kids that will want to work at my business, and I have to be paying them $15 an hour. And we're stifling the ability of these kids to learn at an early age, because for me to pay a 14-year-old kid $15 an hour as a business is a pretty significant amount. And so we're stifling the ability for these kids to learn early, hard work, the skills that are needed for them to be able to work later on in life. So, and that's a great example of government red tape, that having a $15 minimum wage. I also think that as a business owner, I would love to send my workers back to do additional training, take college classes, things like that. And we see the cost of higher education and training is just through the roof. Luckily now we do have online options, things like that, which are a little bit less expensive, but even those options are not inexpensive. And I think that we've seen a rise in the cost of college tuition in line with the funding, the government-backed funding of college tuition. I think that we need to get college tuition under control. We need to have more low-cost options so that as businesses, we can be sending our people back to school and back to training. And we also need more workers in blue collar industries. And traditionally, for the past 30 years, there's been a little bit of a stigma against people's kids going into blue collar trades. My family for a long time didn't like the fact that on paper I work in the horse industry, the farming industry, things like that. It's more than that. But there was a lot of a stigma, and they wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, things like that. But there's a real need for that. So we need to be supporting kids when they're young to get those kind of blue collar jobs, to consider going into blue collar jobs, so that business owners can be hiring them later on and can continue their development.
Great, thank you. Bob, same question. Job preparedness and employee retention are two major workforce factors impacting the small businesses today. What policies do you support which will impact these areas both in the near term and the long term?
Okay, so first I gotta ask you, Mark, how much did you make when you were for minimum wage at your first job?
As I remember, I think it was under $7 an hour.
It was $1.90 in the second. I guess we feel a little bit older than you. So I want to address your question, Colin, specifically in the context of Lynn, because I think it's important to use what I would call a vision that I would have specifically for the city of Lynn that encompasses those two requirements that you were talking about, job preparedness and employee retention. Lynn is the largest city in the 6th District, and it turns out it's the 8th largest in the entire state. My personal vision for Lynn would be one that encompasses good educational opportunities for the city, reliable, safe, and economic transportation, affordability, a vibrancy in the community. Lynn is very diverse, and I found that out personally this summer when I attended the Hispanic Festival in July, and then the Greek Festival, last month. So all those things, I think, would bring or advance, I should say, because, like I said, I was a young kid growing up in Malden, and there was a stigma to Lynn. And to the credit, I think, of the leadership in the city over the years, that's just about passed. I mean, Lynn is a fantastic community that people come to as a destination for the beautiful beaches, for the history, for the art and the culture. So all those things, I think, combine to kind of advance what I said was a vision for Lynn that would make it a community that brings people here for education, to work, and for recreational opportunities.
Wonderful, thank you. So another factor that you guys mentioned, Mark specifically, but Bob, we'll go to you with this question, was in the concept of immigration. So one of the questions it's obviously a big question affecting America today, and it's a large component of workforce with a immigrant population coming in and not being able to quickly obtain the ability to work. So one of the questions that actually came from a member was, where do your policies and your feelings stand on immigration as a phased approach? One of the stances right now is, as a person comes in, they have no access to any resources until they can get to borderline citizenship, which obtains the right to vote and all access to other rights and benefits of citizenship. Where do you stand on something that's a little bit more of a phased approach? Quick access to work, but a longer term almost vetting process to get them the rest of their pathway to citizenship. Is that somewhat of a clear question, or do you need me to?
Not exactly, but I'm assuming I'm going first. Okay.
Throw it
It's
to you.
not exactly clear, Colin, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because that implies that the immigration situation we have today in this country is the situation, to answer your question.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true.
So I guess my response would be, I don't fully agree with that assessment, because if we follow the immigration policies as they are dictated in the DHS regulations, there is a process for each of those things that you remember question: work access, government benefit access, housing, vouchers, everything like that. Under an open border policy, then the question becomes a little bit muddy, because I'm not really sure how to answer it in that case, because if somebody's just walking across the border illegally, I mean they're not supposed to be government assistance and benefits that aren't supposed to be applicable in that case.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe in secure borders. I think everyone should know that. I'm thinking there may be a discussion about doing a pause on all immigration until we get this situation under control. I mean, we're in a situation here where we don't even know how many millions of illegal aliens we have in the country today. It's clearly a drain on local resources, state resources, and federal resources.
All right, thank you. Mark, same question for you. Talking about a phased immigration approach, and where do you stand on immigration in a more broad sense as well?
Yeah, I think, like you said, some sort of phased immigration approach does make sense. Right now, I believe that the U.S. is limiting immigrants to 2 million people a year. I know in the agricultural industry, it's limited to 50,000 people a year are able to get visas, which is not very many people, considering that's the industry that's providing all the the food on the back table and things like that. 2 million people a year is nothing, considering that this is the bulk of the people that are doing a lot of the manual labor jobs. Every restaurant I go to pretty much is reducing their number of hours because they don't have enough workers. So many industries right now are seeing shortfalls in the number of workers that they have. And the lower wage manual jobs are just one of the places where we have immigrants that are really have always been drivers to our economy. Nikola Tesla was an immigrant. He came here as an immigrant. And so many of the things that we are so grateful for today, like electric vehicles and all of the electric technology we have, is thanks to him. If he wasn't able to come here, and if he got wrapped up in World War II, we wouldn't have any of this electric technology that we have. So America is a safe place for a lot of these people to come to be able to explore. And so I think that we need to have a more streamlined approach. And I think that there's 3 things that people should meet to be able to come into this country. They should work or be doing some sort of value add. They should be paying taxes, and they should not be breaking the law. And as long as they're following those 3 things and they stay here for a period of time, then I think that, like you said, we should be able to have a process for them to be able to take advantage of other services.
Thank you. I'm quoting my wife's favorite movie, The American President, when the president stood up and said, being president is all about character. It's one of her favorite lines. So on that subject, talking about the character traits that you feel are required for serving in public office, and your connection personally with those character traits that you feel you embody. So Mark, to you first.
So I think that the character of our role models that we have is so important. Barack Obama said that one of the greatest threats to the young Black male is a fatherless home. We see on TV every day and in movies these people that we should not be holding up as role models. You know, these people doing all sorts of things, you know, glorifying violence and drugs and all this sort of stuff. And so we really need to have people that have good character and who can be role models for our youth, for, you know, other people. So, and that's one of the driving factors to me running as well, looking at the types of people that we see as, see the politicians that we have putting up there. We look at the last presidential election, and there were so many, either you look at Donald Trump and the way he behaved, or you look at, you know, Joe Biden's son, and we need people who are going to be role models, the way they act, the way they conduct themselves. And so that was something that really motivated me to run. I'm not perfect. No one is going to be perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. But I know that it's important how I conduct myself. I hold myself to a very high standard. I try to be honest. And that's one of the things that I don't think that our country or politicians are very honest anymore. And that's something that really disturbs me. For someone to be able to get a 1,500 page bill and to be able to sign their name to that, I don't know how I could sign my name to something that's 1,500 pages if I didn't read it or understand it. So I think character is extremely important.
Thank you so much. Bob, same question. What character traits prepare you for the role of Congress?
I'm not sure it's a character trait, but one of the things that I think is unique to my candidacy is something that's sorely needed in government today, and that's problem solving. I have problem solving skills that I've developed and trained since, you know, I was a undergraduate mechanical engineering student, and I've used those tools and skills as a mechanical engineer, as a business consultant, and now as a business owner for the past 20 years. So I think there's a need to use that kind of analysis to look at a problem or a system or a process that's out of control or needs to be refined, and find, you know, what the root cause of that problem is. And I mean like a true root cause, and not use root cause as our vice president does. It's just a you know, kind of a flip term to say she's got something under control. Mark mentioned integrity. I think that's really important. Okay, we have career politicians today in Washington. Most of them, frankly, are either lawyers or political science majors. And for the longest time, I didn't really understand why that was. I understand why that is now, because those are two areas where you just do a lot of public speaking. Lawyers, by definition, that's their job, and political science majors because they practice it in all their classes. All that brings to Washington, in my personal view, nothing against lawyers or political science majors, is a lot of hot air. Okay, it doesn't bring, you know, somebody with common sense, which is desperately needed in Washington today. Just very simple common sense, so that you can say, as I mentioned to at the beginning of the meeting here, you put trillions of dollars and flood the money supply, there are going to be consequences to that. Okay, that I learned that the first day of economics class in graduate school. You don't hear about the money supply anymore, and I get it. Over time, the money supply isn't that important in the world of economics because of digital transactions, but still, supply and demand is a basic tenet of economics. Everybody saw this coming. but nobody is willing to step up and say, here's what we got to do to combat this.
Thank you. So you guys answered my questions today, and for that, I'm very appreciative. Now I wanted to just give you the kind of the last minute opportunity to make your candidacy pitch. Tell us why we should vote for you for Congress for District 6, Massachusetts. Bob, why don't you give it a kick?
Okay, so again, I want to thank you, Colin and Rick and Christine and the entire chamber, and for everyone attending the meeting this morning, for putting this on and inviting myself and Mark. We really appreciate it. I started my small business in 2002 with a secondhand laptop computer, a telephone, and an internet connection. And I was very fortunate to work very diligently and grow that to the point where I was able to expand a couple of times, and I'm actually going to retire, from the business that I started 20 years ago. I know everyone, I shouldn't say I know everyone, but most of the people in here probably have very similar stories, those of you who own and operate small businesses. I am the only candidate in this race that is not only a member of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, but also an endorsed candidate by NFIB. I endorsed my candidacy in 2020 when I mentioned I ran for state representative. We all saw the effects of COVID and the lockdowns and the mandates on small businesses over the past 2 years. We see what happens when we give governments at all levels the kind of unfettered power that has the ability to do that to our businesses and our society. I promise you, I will be a champion for small businesses. I will oppose any and all future mandates that crush our economies the way that the government crushed ours 2 years ago. To do that, I ask for your help and I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Bob. Mark, same question for you. Give us your pitch for your candidacy. Why should we vote for you for Congress of District 6?
Certainly. Thank you, Colin. And thank you, Bob, for coming up here to this debate. It's a great opportunity for our constituents to hear us. And so JFK said, we don't need a Democrat solution or a Republican solution. We need the right solution. I'll tell you that Bob, I'm sure, knows a lot more about engineering than I do. And Seth Moulton is a veteran. I'm sure he knows a lot more about the military than I do. But I'll tell you that I'm not beholden to any political party. I know a lot when it comes to businesses and how to make the economy work and how to expand the economy. And I will do what I think is best for the constituents in this area and the people of America as a whole. I'm going to be open-minded. And like I said earlier, I think that we need an arbitrator between these two parties so that we can actually get ourselves out of the mess that we're in right now. I don't think that either party is going to be able to do it. Each party, we're swinging back and forth every 4 years, and we need other people in there so that we can actually find middle of the road solutions and do what's actually best for American people, small businesses, and the economy. So that's why I'd like to ask you for your votes on November 8th.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's Colin Connor back again. One of the big things about the Chamber of Commerce is we stand by two standards: have good food and end on time. I wanted to thank Old Time Italian Cuisine for providing us this venue and for delicious breakfast this morning. If you have never been, you should absolutely come here for dinner some night. They have a wonderful dining room, and it's just a fabulous place. And in part two, it's 9:25, so we are ending on time as always. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Again, this is going to be posted online probably later today. and it can be shared and distributed through our Chamber's YouTube link. With that, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next month at our next government affairs meeting. Have a good day.